My phone rang at 2 in the morning. I fumbled for it in the dark, heart already racing, because nobody calls at that hour unless something is wrong. My mother's voice came through sharp and awake, as if she had been waiting for me to answer. "Tomorrow night," she said, "your brother's fiancé's family is coming for dinner." "You need to be here," I sat up. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," she snapped. "But listen carefully. Her father is a federal judge. You can come, but keep your mouth shut. Don't embarrass us the way you always do." I stared into the dark, phone pressed to my ear. Then she added, "And if anyone asks what you do, tell them you work in an office. Don't mention law. Don't mention your firm. This is Bradley's night. Don't make it about you." I should have argued. I should have asked why my own mother needed to hide my life like it was some shameful secret. But it was 2 in the morning, and I had been having variations of that same conversation with Patricia Townsend for 34 years. "Got it," I said. At the time, I thought the most humiliating part of that night would be sitting through another family dinner, pretending to be less than I was. I was wrong. Because a few hours later, at a dining room table in Ridgemont, Virginia, the father of my brother's fiancée stopped in front of my chair, looked me in the eye, and asked one simple question that brought my family's carefully constructed fiction crashing to the floor. "My name is Amelia Townsend. I'm 34 years old, and I grew up as the wrong kind of daughter." Ridgemont is one of those small Virginia towns where everybody knows your name, your grades, your business, and what your mother said about you at the grocery store last Tuesday. In a place like that, reputation isn't just social currency. It's inheritance, it's architecture, it's the wallpaper of your life. My mother understood that better than anyone. Patricia Townsend had 2 children, but if you listened to her talk, you would think she only had one. Bradley. Bradley, who was charming. Bradley, who was going places. Bradley, who had people skills. Bradley, who lit up every room. Bradley, who made her proud. And me, I was difficult, too serious, too opinionated, too quiet when she wanted me cheerful, too vocal when she wanted me silent, too smart in ways that didn't flatter her, too visible in ways that complicated the story she preferred to tell. I was 7 the first time I noticed the mantel in our living room. 5 framed photos of Bradley lined across it like a shrine. Little league uniform, school portrait, birthday grin, church pageant, beach vacation. One picture of me sat half-hidden behind a vase. You had to move the flowers to see my face. At 17, I graduated second in my class. My mother didn't come. Bradley had a baseball game that afternoon. He spent the whole game on the bench, a backup outfielder who never touched the field. But Patricia sat in the bleachers cheering like he was the star of the team while I crossed the stage and took my diploma alone. I won a full scholarship for undergrad. Then I earned a full ride to law school. I studied hard, worked harder, paid my own bills, paid off my loans, built my life without asking my family for a cent. And still, back in Ridgemont, my mother told people I had moved away and was doing office work somewhere near D.C. She never said I was an attorney. She never said I argued federal cases. She never said I had built a career she could have been proud of if pride had ever been the point. That was the thing about my mother. She didn't erase me because she hated me. Hate would have required a kind of attention. She erased me because my existence interfered with the version of our family she wanted everyone else to admire, and I kept showing up anyway. I called every Sunday. I sent birthday cards. I made the 2-hour drive from D.C. for holidays and family dinners and Mother's Day lunches, where every conversation somehow curved back toward Bradley before I could finish a sentence. I kept hoping that one day she would look at me and see a daughter instead of a disruption. Bradley is 5 years younger than I am. He's handsome in an easy way, with a warm smile and relaxed manners that make people trust him before he said anything meaningful. He sells cars outside Richmond. He's decent at it. Not bad, not extraordinary, but if you asked my mother, Bradley was a rising executive, a regional sales director, on the verge of a major promotion, a young man everyone admired. None of that was true. The thing is, Bradley never had to lie. Patricia lied for him. She built the image, polished it, fed it to people in carefully chosen pieces, and Bradley just stood there inside it, accepting the benefits. He learned early that life was easier when you let our mother write the script. The last Thanksgiving before the dinner, Patricia pulled me aside before we sat down to eat. "Don't talk about work tonight," she said. "Bradley's going through a difficult stretch." I agreed. I kept quiet. Then I sat through 3 hours of Bradley exaggerating dealership stories into business triumphs, while my mother nodded along like she was hosting a press conference. Nobody asked me a single question, not one. After dinner, I washed the dishes alone while Patricia posted a photo of Bradley on Instagram with the caption, "So proud of my son's career milestones." I wasn't asking for applause. I wasn't asking her to brag about me online. I only wanted her to stop pretending I was nothing. By then, I had already been a litigation attorney at Whitfield and Keene for 8 years. My work was demanding, precise, and deeply human. Employment discrimination, civil rights, federal litigation, the kind of cases where people came to us after being ignored, diminished, or pushed aside. And we fought to make the record say what really happened. 5 months before that dinner, I argued a civil rights case in the Eastern District of Virginia. The presiding judge was Richard Calloway. He was exactly the kind of judge young attorneys talk about in careful tones: brilliant, efficient, unsparing with sloppy lawyering. Silver hair, exacting questions, no patience for performance. The opposing side had sent a partner from a massive firm. I was lead counsel for our client, and I was terrified, so I prepared. I prepared until my notes had notes, until every possible question had a tab, until I could recite the record in my sleep. And when I stood to argue, something in me settled. The fear didn't disappear, but it sharpened into focus. My answers came clean and fast. My reasoning held. Judge Calloway leaned forward more than once, not because he was impressed, but because he was listening. We won. Afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Judge Calloway stopped me, shook my hand, and said, "Counselor Townsend." That was one of the most precise oral arguments I've heard this year. I stood there in that marble hallway after he walked away, trying not to cry. I didn't tell my mother. There was no point. The last time I had tried to tell her about a case, she cut me off halfway through and said, "Nobody really wants to hear about law stuff." Amelia. Then she spent 40 minutes telling me about a customer who had complimented Bradley at the dealership. So I kept that victory to myself. What I did not know was that Judge Richard Calloway was the father of the woman my brother was about to marry. On Friday afternoon, I left the office at 4, changed out of my courtroom suit, and drove west on I-66 toward Ridgemont. The whole way there, my mother's words sat in my chest like a stone. "Keep your mouth shut. Work in an office. Don't embarrass us." I stopped for gas outside Culpeper and caught my reflection in the window while the pump clicked. Navy silk blouse, tailored slacks. Minimal jewelry. Professional, understated, deliberate. My blazer hung in the back seat. I realized, standing there, that I had dressed carefully without admitting to myself why. Some part of me had already decided that if I was going to be erased, I was not going to look erasable. I arrived an hour early. Patricia met me at the door, perfectly set hair, pearl earrings, lipstick too bright for casual dinner. She looked less like a mother hosting family and more like a woman staging an event. "We need to go over a few things before they arrive," she said. She walked me through the dining room like a director blocking a scene. I would sit at the far end of the table. I would not mention DC unless asked. If asked what I did, I would say office administration. Paperwork, nothing special. I finally looked at her and said, "Mom, I'm a lawyer." "Why do I have to lie?" She spun toward me. "Because this is not your night, Amelia. This is Bradley's night. Can you, for once in your life, not make everything about yourself?" I looked past her into the living room. My father, Dennis, sat in his recliner with the newspaper open, eyes fixed on the sports section. He did not look up. He almost never did. He had spent decades perfecting the art of being present, without ever becoming involved. The front door opened a minute later, and Bradley walked in smiling, already relaxed inside the evening our mother had built for him. "Hey, sis," he said. "Glad you made it." Then, lowering his voice, "Mom told you the rules, right?" I stared at him. "You know about this." He gave a small shrug. "Just for tonight." "It's not a big deal." That was the moment something hardened in me, not because I was surprised, but because I was. My little brother, the boy I had read bedtime stories to, the boy I had driven to practice and helped with homework, was asking me to help diminish myself so he could look taller in the room. I said I won't lie if someone asks me directly. He shrugged again. "Nobody's going to ask." The dining room looked immaculate, white linen tablecloth, good china, crystal vase, fresh flowers. Soft chandelier light, 8 place cards in my mother's careful script. Mine sat near the corner, as far from the center of things as possible without exiling me to the kitchen. Nora arrived first, a little before 7. She was warm-faced and open, auburn hair tucked behind one ear, the kind of person who made eye contact like she actually meant it. She smiled as soon as she saw me. "You must be Amelia," she said, extending a hand. "Bradley's mentioned you. You live in D.C., right?" "What do you do there?" My mouth had barely opened when Patricia appeared at my elbow. "Oh, Amelia does administrative work," she said brightly. "Nothing too exciting." Then she steered Nora away to admire the ring. I stood alone in the dining room, listening to the low hum of the chandelier, smelling flowers that had cost too much, and understanding with sudden clarity that every detail of this evening had been designed to make me vanish. At 7 sharp, the doorbell rang. Patricia floated to the entrance. Richard Calloway stepped inside first, tall and silver-haired, carrying himself with the same contained authority I remembered from the bench. His wife, Margaret, followed just behind him, elegant, observant, composed in a way that suggested she missed very little. Introductions began. "This is my husband, Dennis," handshakes. "And this is my son, Bradley," Patricia said, all but glowing. "He's a regional sales director. He's doing exceptionally well." Bradley smiled and accepted the lie without blinking. Then my mother turned to me. The shift in her voice was subtle but unmistakable, as if she were moving from the main text to a footnote. "And this is Amelia, my daughter. She works in an office up in D.C." Richard Calloway took my hand. Then he paused, not long, just long enough. His brow furrowed with the faint, precise confusion I remembered from the courtroom, the look he wore when testimony didn't line up with the record. "Townsend," he said. "Amelia Townsend." I felt my pulse kick. Patricia laughed too quickly. "Everyone, let's sit. Dinner is ready." She guided him toward the table before the moment could settle. But as he moved away, he looked back at me, and his eyes stayed on mine long enough for both of us to know he was not imagining the recognition. Dinner began under a layer of false normal. Patricia narrated Bradley's life as if she were presenting a highly qualified candidate to a selection committee. Major deals, rising influence, leadership potential, natural talent with clients. Bradley nodded along, smiling modestly, while my father chewed in silence and I kept my gaze on my plate. Margaret watched everything. She watched Patricia redirect conversation away from me. She watched my mother send me to the kitchen twice for things no one needed. She watched Bradley let it happen. She watched my father disappear into the wallpaper. At one point, when I reached for the salad, Patricia cut in over me to ask Richard about local civic events. Later, when I complimented the potatoes, she spoke right through me to show Nora old photos of Bradley. Then Margaret set down her fork and said, very gently, "Patricia, I'd love to hear more about Amelia." The table went still for half a beat. Patricia smiled without blinking. "Oh, Amelia's very private. She doesn't like talking about herself." I looked at my mother, then I looked at Margaret, and I said, "I don't mind at all." Nora smiled at me. "Do you like living in D.C.? I've heard Georgetown is beautiful in the fall." I let out the smallest breath. It was such an ordinary question, such a normal human opening. For a second, I almost forgot I was at my mother's table. "I do," I said. My office is near the federal courthouse, so, Patricia coughed loudly. Not a real cough, a warning. Amelia, she said, would you bring more water from the kitchen? The bottle on the table was still mostly full. Everyone could see it. I rose anyway and carried the pitcher into the kitchen. Patricia followed me in seconds later, voice dropping into a whisper sharp enough to cut skin. What are you doing? Nora asked me a question. You said courthouse. I said my office is near the courthouse. I told you not to mention law courts. Any of it. I turned and looked at her. Really looked at her, and what I saw on her face was not irritation, not even anger. It was fear. Not fear that I would embarrass Bradley, not fear that the evening would become awkward. Real fear, the kind that comes over someone who knows the entire structure they built can collapse under one honest sentence. For the first time in years, I did not feel wounded by it. I felt clear. I'm going back to the table, I said. When I sat down again, Richard Calloway was watching me. The main course arrived, herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables. The caterer's best attempt at making the evening feel effortless. Patricia kept talking. Bradley kept smiling. Then Richard interrupted her mid-sentence. Amelia, he said, how long have you lived in D.C.? About 8 years. 8 years, he repeated. That's a long time. Patricia jumped in. Richard, would you like to see some photos of Bradley as a child? He was the cutest little. Maybe later, he said without looking at her. Then, to me, you must know the Federal Triangle area pretty well. It was not a casual question. Federal Triangle was not where you asked about if you believed someone did clerical work in a vague office. It was where you asked about if you suspected they spent time in and around federal court. I met his gaze. Years of litigation had taught me one thing above all: never look away when the question matters. Yes, I said, I know that area very well. He nodded once. Across the table, Margaret exchanged a look with him. A private, practiced look between two people who had already drawn the same conclusion and were waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. Bradley, oblivious to the cliff edge under his chair, leaned back and laughed. Amelia was such a weird kid growing up, he said. Always reading, always in her room, never wanted to do anything normal. Patricia laughed too. It's true, she always thought she was smarter than everyone else. No one else laughed. Nora's smile faltered. My father stared at his plate. I said nothing. My hands were folded in my lap. My jaw was tight enough to crack bone, but my face stayed still. Courtrooms teach you how to sit inside hostile silence without flinching. They teach you how to endure being underestimated until underestimation becomes its own trap. Richard watched my mother mock me. He watched Bradley join in. He watched my father disappear. He watched me remain composed at a table where I was meant to be small. Then he picked up his knife and tapped his glass. The ring cut clean through the room. I'd like to say a few words, he said. Patricia lit up. This, I could tell, was the moment she had imagined from the start. The distinguished federal judge offering a gracious toast, approving her son, blessing the engagement, ratifying the image she had spent years constructing. Of course, she said, we'd love that. Richard stood and buttoned his jacket. He began speaking in the calm, deliberate rhythm of someone used to being heard. He spoke first to Nora, telling her she had always possessed a rare ability to see people clearly. Then he turned to Bradley and welcomed him, his tone courteous but reserved. Then he said, the foundation of any family is honesty. Without it, everything is built on sand. I've spent a great many years listening to people try to manage the truth, reshape it, conceal it, soften it. In the end, the truth nearly always finds daylight. Patricia nodded along, smiling, still missing the turn in the road. Richard moved slowly around the table as he spoke, and then he stopped beside my chair. He looked down at me and said, I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you here. The room changed. You can feel it when a room changes. The air pulls tight, cutlery stills, breathing shifts. Every person becomes suddenly aware that something irreversible is about to happen. Patricia laughed, bright and brittle. Oh, Amelia is my daughter, of course she's here. Richard did not look at her. He looked at me. Who are you to them exactly? He asked gently. Because the Amelia Townsend I know. He let the sentence hang. Absolute silence. No one moved. Nora's eyes flicked from me to her father. Bradley froze with his hand around his wine glass. My father looked up for the first time all evening, and my mother's smile began to crack around the edges. Richard, she said carefully, I think you may be confusing Amelia with someone else. I'm not, he said. His voice never rose, it didn't need to. I remember every attorney who has argued before my bench in the last year. Counselor Townsend argued 2 cases in my courtroom. She won both. Margaret's hand went lightly to her mouth. Bradley set his glass down too hard. My mother stared at Richard as if the floor had opened beneath her chair. Then Richard turned to me and said, Counselor, would you like to clarify? I had promised myself I would not lie if someone asked me directly, so I didn't. Yes, I said. I'm a litigation attorney at Whitfield and Keene. My practice is primarily in federal court. Judge Calloway presided over 2 of my cases. Nora turned to me, stunned. You're a lawyer. Before I could answer, Patricia jumped in, voice thin with panic. Richard. I'm sure there are many Amelia Townsends. There are not many Amelia Townsends who argued a civil rights case in the Eastern District 5 months ago and delivered one of the finest oral arguments. I've heard in years, he said it plainly. No flourish, no pity, just fact. Then Margaret spoke for the first time since the silence fell. You told us she did office work. My mother opened her mouth and closed it again. Bradley looked at me like I had betrayed him. That was the part that almost made me laugh, the sheer audacity of it. My mother lied. My brother benefited. A judge told the truth. And somehow, in Bradley's mind, I was the one who had broken the evening. I didn't come here to make a scene, I said. I came to celebrate your engagement. Judge Calloway recognized me. That's all that happened. From the far end of the table, my father said quietly, She's telling the truth. No one looked at him. No one ever did. Margaret folded her hands and addressed my mother with a calm that felt more devastating than anger. Patricia, you introduced your daughter as an office administrator. In reality, she's a federal litigator. You introduced your son as a regional sales director. Is that true? Patricia tried to recover. Bradley is being considered for promotion. Margaret didn't blink. That wasn't my question. Then Nora turned to Bradley. Is that your actual title? Bradley swallowed. The whole table waited. Finally he said, barely above a whisper, Sales associate. Another silence. Different this time. Heavier. This one was not surprise, it was recognition. The recognition that the evening had not been built on harmless exaggeration, but on deliberate deception. Nora pushed her chair back slowly and stood. Not dramatic, not loud, just done. I need some air, she said. Bradley rose halfway. Nora, don't. One word. Quiet, final. She walked toward the front door. Margaret followed after a brief squeeze of Richard's shoulder. I sat there watching the wreckage and feeling something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not relief, grief, because no part of me had wanted vindication like this. I had spent years wishing for something far smaller and far sadder. A normal dinner, a simple introduction, one honest sentence from my mother. Instead, it took a federal judge to say my name out loud in order for the truth to be allowed into the room. Patricia began to cry. Real tears, or practiced ones, or both. With my mother, it was often impossible to separate emotion from strategy because she had spent so many years using one to control the other. I did this for Bradley, she said. I just wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted them to see us the right way. Then she pointed at me, hand shaking. And you always do this. You always need attention. Even tonight. I looked at her across that perfect table, at the white linen and the crystal and the expensive flowers and the half-eaten salmon congealing under chandelier light. And I said the truest thing I had said to her in years. I didn't ruin anything. I sat where you told me to sit. I said what you told me to say. I let you introduce me as someone I'm not. Judge Calloway recognized me because I stood in his courtroom and did my job. That didn't happen to hurt you. It just happened. But you could have what? Lied to a federal judge about my own identity while he stood in front of me. She had no answer, because there wasn't one. Richard sat back down then, composed and silent, as if he had entered the facts into evidence and no longer needed to argue the case. He caught my eye once and gave the smallest nod. It wasn't congratulatory, it wasn't sympathetic, it was simply the acknowledgement of one professional to another. The truth had been established. Bradley turned on me. "Why couldn't you just keep quiet for one night, Amelia?" I stared at him. "I was quiet all night, Brad. I sat in the corner. I answered nothing. I let Mom reduce me to office paperwork. I only spoke when someone asked me a direct question. You could have gone along with it." Nora reappeared in the doorway then, eyes red but steady. "Are you hearing yourself?" she asked him. He turned. "Nora, this is. Are you asking your sister to lie?" He said nothing. She stepped farther into the room. "Did you know your mother lied to my parents about Amelia?" Bradley hesitated too long. "It's just how Mom is," he muttered. There it was. The sentence children of controlling people learn early, the sentence that excuses everything and heals nothing. It's just how she is. Nora looked at him for a long time. Then she asked, if she lied about Amelia, what else has she lied about? No one answered. No one needed to, the room already knew. Richard eventually stood, buttoned his jacket again, and thanked my parents for dinner with the measured politeness of a man choosing restraint over commentary. Margaret did the same, but before she turned away, she touched my arm lightly and said, "No apology is owed from you." Richard came to my chair, extended his hand, and said, "It was good to see you again, Counselor Townsend." I stood and shook it. "You too, Judge." When the Callaways left, Nora got into the back seat of her parents' car without looking back. Bradley stood in the doorway as if the entire evening had happened to him rather than because of him. I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. Then I looked at my mother. She sat at the head of the table, mascara streaked, hands flat against the linen like she could still keep the surface from splitting if she pressed hard enough. "Mom," I said, "I love you. But tonight is the last time I sit at a table where I have to pretend to be someone else." She flinched. I kept going. "I am not ashamed of who I am. I'm not going to make myself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. If that's the price of being here, I won't pay it anymore." Then I turned to Bradley. "Congratulations on your engagement." "I mean that, but if you want a relationship with me, you call me yourself. Not through Mom, not on her terms, yours." He had nothing to say. So I took my blazer from the hall closet, walked out the front door, and closed it softly behind me. No one followed. That was what I noticed first. No footsteps, no voice calling my name, no plea. No apology. The porch light cast a long shadow ahead of me, and I was the only one walking in it. I heard voices through the screen a minute later as I reached my car. Bradley's voice, urgent. "Nora, wait." Nora's answer, low and final. "You sat there and let your mother lie about your sister. About you, I need time." Then a car door slammed. Headlights swept over the lawn. The Callaways' car pulled out of the driveway and disappeared into the dark. Bradley stepped onto the porch behind me. "Do you know what you just did?" he called. I turned with my hand on the car door and looked at my little brother standing under the porch light in khakis and a polo shirt, suddenly smaller than I had ever seen him. "Yes," I said. I answered a question honestly. Then I got in my car and drove back to Arlington. The highway was almost empty, just white lines, dark fields, and 2 hours of Virginia night. I kept both hands on the wheel and let the adrenaline burn itself out in silence. Somewhere near Manassas, I started crying, not because I had been surprised by any of it, but because for the first time in my life, I had stopped helping them do it. I got home a little after 11 and saw 14 unread messages on my phone. I left them there until morning. When I finally read them, the first 3 were from Patricia. "You ruined everything tonight. Nora won't return Bradley's calls. I hope you're happy." Bradley had sent 4, "Thanks a lot. Mom is devastated. Nora is furious. You could have just stayed quiet." That last message sat on the screen like a family motto. You could have just stayed quiet. Dennis had sent 1 message at dawn. "I'm sorry, Amelia." 3 words from my father. more than I had gotten from him in years. Then there was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Amelia, this is Nora. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Would you be willing to get coffee this week?" And another, passed along through her from Margaret. "Dear Amelia, your composure last night was remarkable. Richard and I would be delighted to have you for dinner sometime. Just you." I sat in my quiet kitchen with coffee cooling in my hand and thought about what it meant that two women who had known me for one evening had seen me more clearly than my own mother had in 34 years. I met Nora that Tuesday in Georgetown. She looked exhausted, not dramatic, just hollowed out by the work of reevaluating everything she had been told. We sat in a brick-walled cafe while espresso hissed behind the counter and June light warmed the windows. She told me my mother had already been preparing the ground for months. "She told my parents you weren't close to the family," Nora said carefully. "She implied you had personal issues, not directly, but enough that my father expected someone unstable." "Someone difficult." I just nodded. That part, strangely, didn't shock me. It fit. Nora looked down into her coffee. "Bradley knew about the lies about your career. He admitted that. He says he didn't know she implied anything about your mental state." "I believe him," I said. "That sounds like the kind of lie my mother would keep for herself." Then Nora asked me the question underneath all the rest. "Is Bradley a good person?" I took my time. "He's not cruel," I said. "He was a sweet kid. He can be thoughtful, but he's passive in a way that becomes its own kind of harm. He grew up with a mother who controlled the narrative, and he learned that the easiest thing was to stand where she put him and let her tell the story. That doesn't make him evil. But it does mean the people around him get hurt while he avoids discomfort." Nora nodded slowly, like she had already known and just needed to hear it aloud. A week later, I called my mother. She answered immediately, certain I was finally ready to apologize. "No," I said when she said my name. "I'm calling to tell you what changes now." Then I told her. I would not come to any gathering where I was expected to hide my life. I would not answer 2 a.m. phone calls instructing me to stay silent. I would not introduce myself as less than I was to protect Bradley's image. I would always answer the phone if she called, but the conversation had to be real. No scripts, no roles, no shrinking. She cried. She said she had only wanted Bradley to have a good life. And I said, "I know, but not at the cost of mine." Then I hung up. 3 months passed. Nora postponed the engagement. Not a full breakup, but a pause long enough to force honesty into places that had never required it before. She asked Bradley to start therapy. To my surprise, he did. He called me once in September. Awkward, halting, full of long silences. He didn't apologize, not exactly. But he said, "My therapist says I let Mom do too much of the talking for my life." It wasn't enough. But it was the first unscripted thing I had ever heard him say about her. Patricia went quiet for 6 weeks. No calls, no guilt messages, no performances. Then one day she texted, simple and stripped of all decoration, "I miss you." I replied, "I miss you too, but I need you to respect what I asked for." She didn't answer. Dennis called next. I nearly dropped the phone when I saw his name. He said, "I should have spoken a long time ago." "Yes," I said. "You should have." Then we talked for 4 awkward minutes about azaleas and the weather and a bird hitting the kitchen window. It was the first conversation we had ever had that felt like two people rather than a father and a spectator. In October, I accepted Margaret Calloway's invitation to dinner. Their house was warm in every sense of the word. No place cards, no strategic seating, no performative introductions. Richard poured wine and asked about my caseload. Margaret asked about my apartment, my neighborhood, whether I liked living where I did. Nora was there too, softer now, steadier. We ate at a round table. No head of the table, no corners. No hierarchy disguised as hospitality. At one point, Margaret passed me the bread basket and said, almost casually, "Amelia, in this house, you never have to be anyone but yourself." I had stood in federal courtrooms without trembling. That sentence nearly undid me, because it was so simple, so ordinary, So devastatingly close to everything I had wanted from my own family for decades. Not applause, not special treatment, not praise. Just a seat at a table where I did not have to disappear. In November, I was sitting at my desk reviewing deposition transcripts when my phone buzzed. Mom, I let it ring twice before answering. There was a long pause on the line. Then Patricia spoke, and her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. I want to hear about your work, she said. If you want to tell me. I closed my eyes. I thought about every Sunday call she had redirected, every sentence she had cut off, every time she had chosen Bradley's story over mine. Do you mean that? I asked. I'm trying, she said. That wasn't redemption. It wasn't repair. It wasn't some perfect transformation after one public collapse, but it was real. And for the first time in my adult life, my mother asked me a question about my work and waited for the answer. So I told her about my case, and she listened. If this story hit home for you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that telling the truth is not the same thing as causing harm. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, leave a comment and tell me which one you chose. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.